The night my father called me worthless in front of everyone, something inside me didn't break. It ended. There is a difference between being hurt and being finished, and after years of begging silently to be seen, I finally understood it. I stood at the end of his birthday table, listening to him throw insults at me as if I were an embarrassment he could sweep out of his life. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I simply looked at him and realized I would never again fight for a seat at a table that only welcomed a smaller version of me. My name is Natalie Bennett. I'm 34 years old, and 3 weeks after that night, the same family who mocked my choices would discover that the daughter they dismissed had quietly become the strongest person among them. But by then, something had changed forever. I no longer needed their approval to breathe. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, inside a house where success only counted if it looked traditional. My father, Thomas Bennett, was an engineer who spent decades at the same company and treated consistency like a moral achievement. My mother, Margaret, was softer, but she believed in the same rules. My older brother Ethan followed every formula perfectly, and my sister Claire mastered the art of pleasing everyone around her. I was different, and in my family, different often meant wrong. Even as a child, I loved building things. At 12, I transformed our garage into a small weekend market. I restored old furniture, bundled second-hand dishes into attractive collections, and wrote little stories that made every item feel special. At 15, I helped local artists photograph their products so they could sell online. At 18, I was creating simple websites for women who sold handmade goods at county fairs. I wasn't interested in fitting into a box. I was fascinated by people. I wanted to understand why customers bought certain things, why stories mattered more than technical details, and why presentation could completely change someone's perception of value. But every accomplishment was dismissed. My father called them cute little hobbies. Every compliment felt temporary, like he was waiting for me to become the daughter he actually wanted. When Ethan succeeded, we celebrated. When Claire earned awards, everyone called relatives to share the news. When I earned enough money at 19 to pay my own expenses and buy my own equipment, my father barely looked up. He said, that energy would be impressive if you used it for a real future. Eventually, I enrolled in college because disappointing myself felt easier than fighting everyone else. But after 3 semesters, I knew I was living someone else's dream. The classrooms taught theories I was already practicing in real life. Professors explained consumer behavior while I had already spent years learning it firsthand. The day I told my family I was leaving school, the atmosphere in the house changed immediately. My father looked at me with disappointment so heavy it almost felt physical. He didn't ask what I planned to build. He asked how much shame I planned to bring to the family name. I left anyway. I rented a tiny apartment above a laundromat and worked harder than I had ever worked before. There were nights I slept beside stacks of inventory and mornings when I questioned every decision I had ever made. But I kept going because every failure taught me something valuable. The hardest part wasn't being exhausted. It wasn't being broke. It was realizing that the people who claimed to love me would have preferred seeing me struggle in an acceptable way rather than succeed in a way they couldn't control. Then, at 25, I met someone who changed everything. Her name was Sofia Delgado, and unlike my family, she saw me immediately. She didn't see a college dropout. She saw a builder. She saw potential that had been buried under years of criticism. And the advice she gave me would eventually create a business empire my family never imagined possible. But they still had no idea what was coming. And neither did I. Sofia Delgado changed my life with one sentence. She looked at me during our first conversation and said, "You are not disorganized. You are operating at a level your environment cannot understand yet." Nobody had ever said something like that to me before. For years, I had been trying to prove I was enough. Sofia taught me to stop proving and start building. We met at a trade event in Cincinnati when I was 25. I was exhausted, carrying too many responsibilities and pretending I wasn't afraid. She had decades of experience helping small businesses grow, and within minutes she understood exactly where my strengths lived. I wasn't meant to work inside somebody else's system. I was meant to create one. Over the next several years, we built something extraordinary together. I created a company that helped independent makers expand their businesses without losing their identity. We developed branding systems, shipping networks, customer retention programs, software tools, and partnerships that allowed talented creators to compete against giant corporations. It wasn't glamorous. There were months when I chose payroll over my own comfort. There was one winter when I wore gloves inside my apartment because I couldn't justify spending money on heating while my employees depended on me. I learned that entrepreneurship wasn't freedom. It was responsibility multiplied every single day. Slowly, everything began changing. At 30, I had dozens of employees. At 32, national companies wanted partnerships. At 34, my ownership stake had grown into a fortune worth more than $30 million. But I never told my family the truth. Maybe I was protecting them. Maybe I was protecting myself. Deep down, I still hoped they would someday choose me without needing success to force them into it. So I stayed quiet. When my mother needed help with unexpected medical expenses, the money somehow appeared. When Ethan struggled during a home purchase, a financial solution magically arrived. When Claire's wedding costs suddenly exploded, the missing funds were quietly covered. Nobody knew it was me. My father would sit at family dinners talking proudly about being the backbone of the family, while unknowingly benefiting from my support. I never corrected him. I told myself that love didn't need recognition. I was wrong. One evening, Ethan mentioned wanting to build a consulting business on the side. I offered to help him create marketing systems that actually worked. He laughed immediately. "I'm not taking business advice from someone who got lucky online." My father nodded in agreement. "A degree teaches discipline," he said. "That matters more than hustle." I smiled and stayed quiet, but something inside me was beginning to change. Years of swallowing disrespect were slowly becoming something colder. Silence was no longer protecting relationships. It was making their behavior easier. Then my father's 62nd birthday arrived. For months, I had planned a gift that wasn't flashy or dramatic. Through my financial advisors, I had created a retirement package that would allow my parents to stop worrying about unexpected medical bills and future expenses. I carried one more thing with me that night. Hope. A dangerous amount of hope. I thought that if I finally showed them who I truly was, maybe everything would change. Maybe they would stop seeing the 19-year-old college dropout and start seeing the woman I had become. Dinner started normally. My mother focused on the food. Claire talked about work. Ethan filled every conversation with financial terminology. My father sat comfortably at the head of the table, enjoying the authority he had held for decades. Nobody asked me about my life. Nobody asked about my business. Nobody asked why I looked happier and stronger than before. After dessert, I finally placed the envelope beside my father's plate. "I want to share something," I said quietly. He opened it and stared at the documents. I explained that my company had reached another milestone and that I had prepared something to secure their future because I loved them. The room became completely silent. Then Ethan laughed. Claire looked uncomfortable. And my father slowly lifted his eyes toward me with an expression I had never seen before. It wasn't gratitude. It wasn't surprise. It was anger. And within seconds, a lifetime of resentment was about to explode across that dining room table. The silence in that room lasted only a few seconds, but it felt much longer. My father stared at the documents as if they were insulting him personally. Then he placed them back on the table and asked, "Do you think money makes you equal to people who actually lived life the right way?" I took a slow breath. "This isn't about being equal," I said. "It's about taking care of the people I love." Then I made the mistake that changed everything. I told the truth. I explained that I had quietly helped our family for years. I had covered part of Mom's medical expenses. I had helped Ethan during his home purchase. I had saved Claire's wedding when costs unexpectedly rose. I wasn't trying to embarrass anyone. I simply wanted honesty to exist in that room for once. Instead, everything exploded. Ethan stood up immediately. "So, what? We're charity projects now?" Claire looked stunned. My mother started crying. And my father suddenly pushed his chair back so hard that it scraped across the floor. In that moment, I understood something painful. Some people would rather attack you than admit they've depended on you. "You walked into my house trying to buy authority," and my father shouted. "No," I answered calmly. "I walked into your house trying to show love." That only made him angrier. He pointed at me and said, "A money made by a college dropout will never impress me." Ethan joined him. Claire stayed silent. Then my father said the words I will never forget. "You are still uneducated trash with good timing." The room froze. Then he shouted louder. "Get out of my house, you lowlife. And don't come back here acting like money makes you one of us." One of us. The words echoed inside my head, as if I had ever truly belonged there. I picked up my purse. My hands were perfectly steady. I looked around the room one final time. My mother stared at the table. Claire looked ashamed but said nothing. Ethan looked almost satisfied. I looked at my father. "Okay," I said softly. "Fine." Then I walked away. I sat inside my car for 2 minutes before starting the engine. I didn't cry immediately. I simply stared through the windshield and felt something inside me become cold and peaceful at the same time. I was finished. Before sunrise, I packed my belongings, deleted the family group chat, boxed every photograph I owned, and left Columbus behind forever. By the next day, I was driving toward Savannah, Georgia. I didn't leave a note. 3 weeks later, my brother arrived at my front door. He looked exactly the same, except now there was stress hidden behind his confidence. He didn't apologize. He immediately started defending Dad. "You know birthdays are emotional," he said. "Maybe you took everything too personally." I stared at him for a moment. Then he revealed why he had actually come. A real estate deal had failed. He needed money. "A temporary loan," he said. "Family helps family." I almost laughed. His expression changed instantly. Then my phone rang. It was my chief financial officer calling about a 7-figure licensing agreement and a major expansion project. I answered without hesitation. I discussed contracts, approved budgets, confirmed deadlines. When I hung up, Ethan looked at me differently. For the first time in his life, he wasn't looking at his younger sister anymore. He was looking at a stranger he no longer understood. "No," I said. He frowned. "Not no for now," I continued. "No forever. No loans. No emergency rescues. No more funding people who publicly humiliate me and privately depend on my silence." His face hardened. "Success made you selfish." I shook my head. Success didn't change me. It simply made it impossible for people like you to keep pretending I owe you everything while deserving nothing. He left angry. But something much bigger had already begun. Because after returning home, Ethan would tell everyone exactly how successful I really was. And for the first time in their lives, my family would no longer control the story they had spent years telling about me. The truth spread faster than anyone expected. Within weeks, articles about my company began circulating throughout Columbus. Business publications featured my work. Podcasts quoted my interviews. My workshops for entrepreneurs started attracting attention far beyond Georgia. Suddenly, people who had ignored me for years wanted conversations. Old classmates reached out. Distant relatives sent messages. The consequences arrived one by one. At my father's company, younger employees started discussing my success openly. The same man who had spent decades promoting traditional parts was now forced to watch colleagues celebrate the daughter he had publicly rejected. At first, he became defensive. Then he became angry. Eventually, he became quiet. A few months later, he accepted an early retirement package after a stress-related breakdown. Ethan faced consequences too. He had apparently been exaggerating his connection to my company at work to gain influence. Once people discovered the truth, his reputation suffered badly. Claire was different. She sent me a sincere message. "I knew Dad was wrong that night," she said. "I stayed silent because I was afraid he'd turn on me too. I'm ashamed of that." For the first time in years, I believed someone in my family was actually telling the truth. Then something unexpected happened. The company where my father had worked for more than 3 decades invited me to deliver a keynote speech about innovation and non-traditional career paths. I laughed when I saw the title. Success Beyond Credentials. The irony was impossible to ignore. My mother started calling almost every day after that. She said the family wanted to heal. She said my father was under pressure. She said everyone missed me. Eventually, one message finally arrived that mattered. Your father says he was wrong. Not embarrassed. Not misunderstood. Wrong. I agreed to attend the event, but I made one thing very clear. There would be no pretending. No fake family dinner. No quiet reset. If we were ever going to have a relationship again, it would be built on truth, respect, and boundaries. When I walked onto that stage, I immediately saw him sitting in the audience. Thomas Bennett. For the first time in my life, he didn't look powerful. He looked human. I delivered my speech calmly. I spoke about talent. I spoke about dignity. I spoke about how dangerous it is to judge people before understanding their potential. Then I said something that changed the entire room. A person's value exists long before their resume impresses you. The true measure of character is how you treat someone before you know what they can do for you. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even without looking directly at my father, I knew he understood. After the presentation, he asked to speak privately. We stood in a quiet hallway. My mother stood nearby. Claire watched silently. Ethan stayed several steps behind. Then my father said the most honest thing he had ever said to me. Your success made me feel unnecessary. I looked at him for a moment. Then I answered. I wasn't valuable because strangers applauded for me today. I was valuable the night you called me trash. I was valuable when I lived above that laundromat. I was valuable every time I helped this family without asking for recognition. He cried. I didn't. I wasn't angry anymore. I was simply done carrying everyone else's version of who I should be. I told them my boundaries. No more financial support. No more access to my business. Relationships would now be built on respect or not exist at all. Months later, I stood outside my cottage in Savannah watching the water move under the evening sky. My rescue dog, June, rested beside me. The air was peaceful. And for the first time in my life, the word home meant something I had chosen for myself. I finally understood something important. The greatest revenge isn't making people suffer. It's building a life so complete that their approval becomes unnecessary. The greatest freedom isn't being chosen. It's choosing yourself first. Have you ever been underestimated by the very people who benefited from your strength? Share your experience below. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stop shrinking yourself for people who refuse to see your worth.